Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as you can see out here on my bench I've got a couple trays. These trays have the contents of what used to be in my VermiBag Mini, in which I had European nightcrawlers going. The population of my European nightcrawlers is now 720 days old, and it was 20 days ago when that population reached 700 days that I decided to extract them from the VermiBag Mini. And at that time, I didn't really know what to expect, but what I found was that I was sifting the material as it came out. Some of the material sifted out really nicely, and that material ended up here. Oh, it looks like it's developing a little bit of mold. So in here, in this tub, I've got what went through the screen and is what I would consider more or less finished castings, but I also assume that it's got a bunch of cocoons in it too. And anything that got caught within the screen, and that includes the worms too, all ended up down here in this container to my right. And it was a little bit clumpy, this stuff, and I figured if it was left a little bit longer to just dry, then it would, eventually start to dry out enough that I can crumble it and make it a little bit more granular. And then in the end, we'll have a lot more of what I consider to be good, fine, finished castings. It's just that this stuff was a little too clumpy to go through my screen, but I do consider the majority of what's in here to also be finished castings. Just a little too damp still, and a little too clumpy. But since that clumpy stuff and the worms were what got caught in the screen, that stuff all ended up in here. So here, castings and cocoons. Here, large clumpy stuff that wouldn't pass through the screen, as well as the worms. So I depicted that arrangement here on this little illustration. So same way the explanation just came to you. One of the bins is here and the other is over here. And that was 20 days ago. And then just 10 days ago, we were in here last to check on how things were coming along. And at that time, we had set up 10 days ago sort of a bedding area on the edge of each of these bins, sort of anticipating a future movement of the worms into that bedding. There's no food in that bedding area yet, just bedding, just cardboard and paper and stuff like that. And at some point soon, we're going to probably want to start loading food into those bedding areas to try to convince the worms in this container to make their way over there, as well as any babies that start emerging from the cocoons in this area over here. And I don't know where we're at yet in terms of cocoons hatching or the material drying enough to be nice and crumbly yet. So we're coming in here 10 days later to see how things are progressing in that direction. The other thing we did 10 days ago when we were in here, we observed a lot of mites in here. We even got some close-up footage of them. And to try to combat the mites, we did give each of these bins a treatment of neem cake. So I figured today my goals are going to be not to initiate the migration of the worms yet. So we're probably just going to leave that bedding area as is on the edge. Here, I want to just till up the material a little bit, maybe blend in some of this fungi that's growing here. But give it another treatment of the neem cake, hopefully trying to reduce the mite population in here. And the neem cake can also serve as a little snack for the worms that start to emerge from their cocoons, because from what I understand, neem cake is something that the worms really enjoy. I want to put neem cake in here too, but while we're in here, I'd like to see if I can crumble some of the material up a little bit to make it a little bit more granular. So I'm going to turn the camera down to face into these containers, and I'm going to put this glove on and we'll get to work. Now, besides the neem cake, which looks like this, I've also got my water bottle here. So when we get into these bedding areas, I just want to make sure that the cardboard that was used to build those up is nice and damp. So I'm going to make sure I've got some water on hand to spray them down if they need it. And chances are that it's probably dried out a little bit since we were in here last 10 days ago. They were built up with totally drenched materials, but the coverings, as you may have also noticed, are different from the way we last left it from 10 days ago. 10 days ago, these plastics were covering almost the entire tray, but I came in here soon after, maybe a day or two after we were last in here, and I rearranged the coverings to allow for a lot more airflow and a lot more drying of the material. And it's kind of interesting how this mold has sort of developed on here. I'm not expecting, not in such a short period of time of only 10 days, to expect that the mite numbers would have drastically dropped in here yet. So I believe you have to sort of wait for that outcome when it comes to using the NEEM on the mites. So it's not going to wipe out your mites right away, as I understand it. I believe it's going to prevent the existing mites from being able to have offspring. So the existing mites should continue on as they were. It's just their tendency to reproduce will be stifled by the stuff. And here again, I'm just repeating stuff that I've heard. I don't know if it's true or not, but so far every time I've repeated that story, no one's contradicted me or corrected me. So I'm continuing with the assumption that that is in fact the way the stuff operates. So I'm continuing with my expectations being set in that way. All I really did here was I just blended in some of this little bit of fungus, mold, whatever it is that's growing here on the surface, to get it down into the material, along with the stuff on the surface, which is a little bit drier. But you certainly have to go. You don't have to go very deep to get to the nice moist stuff. It's a nice thing about castings; they just have this incredible ability to hang on to their moisture. So I'm not too worried about the castings drying out drastically and the material all becoming exceedingly dry, just because of the nature of the castings. And I keep kind of expecting that I might see a baby worm here or there. And I would love to see one here or there, but so far I don't see many. Well, so far I don't see any. But I'm not giving up. I know that the cocoons that slipped through the screening process were probably a variety of ones that had just been recently deposited into the material, which probably do need 3 or 4 weeks, or I don't know how long to hatch. But I'm assuming also that some of the cocoons were probably pretty close to being ready to hatch. And that's the reason I keep thinking that there's just, gotta be some baby worms cruising around in here soon. It's only a matter of time, but it is a little bit unusual that I'm not seeing any. Maybe not unusual, just kind of contrary to my expectations. So I just want to be clear on that. I don't really know what to expect here, but I am kind of hoping that maybe at some point we're going to start observing some baby worms cruising around in this material. And once we do, we're probably going to want to try luring them over into this edge of the bin where, surprisingly, the material is rather damp. A lot more damp than I thought it would be, which is cool. So I don't even know if I've got to add much moisture, but I will anyway, I believe. So now the other stuff I forgot to mention was the other stuff that I placed into these bedding areas. The other stuff that you see underneath the cardboard is the material that I pulled out of the very, very bottom of the VermiBag Mini. It was the stuff that had collected down at the harvest panel, that little opening at the bottom of the bag that you open up to eject the materials that have theoretically all broken down and are ready for harvest. But the stuff had kind of clumped together and dried into this little brick. And I'm thinking that after 20 days, it's a little surprising that the material hasn't kind of absorbed the moisture from the surrounding material enough that I should be able to break it all up. But it's getting there. It's gradually letting me break it up into smaller and smaller chunks. So in time, it'll all break up, I believe. And I'm also using that stuff sort of as bedding, also based on the assumption that I think it probably has some chunks of paper, cardboard, different types of bedding type materials clumped within it, which never really had a chance to fully break down before they sort of gelled together into that little block that I pulled out of the bottom of the VermiBag. So the moisture level's not too bad, must say. Definitely got a nice little dampness to it, but I'm going to add some moisture into here anyhow. So I'm going to grab my squirt bottle and see, down underneath this stuff is also some more cardboard. I'm going to give this stuff a nice little spray down. And the plastic will go right over the top of it one more time to keep the moisture in. And perhaps I'll even position it in a way that makes sure that it covers things a bit more thoroughly to limit the amount of moisture that evaporates out of it. And we'll start gradually putting this cardboard back in here, giving it all a nice little soak down in the process. I didn't see any worms in here either. But, you know, after only 20 days, it's quite possible that we've still got a little bit more time before the cocoons begin hatching and we begin seeing baby worms. I mean, there's also that possibility that my assumption is wrong and that there's really no babies to be expected in here, although that seems like a stretch. It just seems much more realistic to expect that there were just tons and tons of cocoons within this material that was small enough to pass through the screen, and that in due time they'll start emerging, the babies will start emerging from those cocoons. So here again, a lot of this is operating on certain assumptions. I've got no guarantees on the outcome, so we will see how things progress over time. But you know, almost everywhere I look, I could see a cocoon. You know, they're all pretty dark in color too, because you know, none of them are going to be freshly deposited into here. They're all going to be ones that have been developing for some time now, getting darker, getting closer to the point in time when they're going to hatch and the baby cocoons are going to emerge from them. So I'm sure the camera's probably picking some of them up. They're pretty clearly visible. Even though they're a little bit darker, they do clearly stand out against this fairly dark castings material. And I'm sure they're not just on the surface, I'm sure they're also throughout the material. So I do continue to hope that we're going to start seeing some baby worms cruising around through this material soon. And then in due time we're going to begin to try baiting them out of the material by creating a nice tempting feeding area for them over on the edge. So now, just like this one you see here, both of these little cups have a tiny little holes on the bottom that I'm able to shake the neem cake out through. So I'm just peppering it onto the, kind of dusting it onto the top surface here. And somehow I just sensed that I didn't see as many mites in here. Last time I came in here, the mites were sort of congregating into little groups. They were very active. It seemed like there were a couple different types of mites in here too. But you know, like I said, I don't expect to see the mite numbers drop right away. I just expect that, you know, whatever mites do exist will kind of die of old age and fade away, but they'll be inhibited from being able to reproduce by having consumed the neem cake. At least that's my understanding of how this stuff works, so don't quote me on that. And if anyone knows better, I would definitely appreciate being corrected. But that's my understanding of how this stuff works, and you know, as long as we're at it, why don't we also treat this bedding area a little bit with this stuff too. I've certainly got enough here to spread it around, so just want to leave enough to treat the other container too. So onto here, that's pretty much all I wanted to do in there. Onto here, the material is drying out nicely. I grab a handful. The stuff on the very top would probably still be hard to break up just because it has dried a lot more than whatever's down lower. But hopefully the stuff that's a little bit lower down is going to still be damp enough to easily crumble, but dry enough to not be like a little tiny brick. And we don't have to go down very far to start coming up on some of the worms already. We can see some of them over here. It's kind of interesting how they've all sort of jumbled into a little ball. It makes me worry a little bit that maybe I always thought that jumbling behavior was the worms really trying to protect themselves by kind of huddling together. So I'm wondering if there's something about this material that's turning them off. I mean, it is very, very worked material, very heavily broken down. I kind of assume that there's still a good amount of uncomposted materials in here too that didn't screen out, so I assume that there was also a good amount of food that they can eat. But I'm also curious now, if I dig down a little bit and I start to look around, am I going to find more worms? If you didn't see the video of me setting these systems up, I laid down a piece of beach towel, which you see right here on the bottom. The purpose of the beach towel was to prevent any of this casting material from passing through the holes on the bottom of the container, because these containers both have holes drilled into the bottom of them. But it started to worry me that I would just make a huge mess with castings passing through those little holes and dropping all over the place. So the towel was really there only to guard against the outflow of the material out of the bin. So now here we're encountering some more worms. But I'm wondering if the worms are somehow digging the space right beneath the towel. And that does seem to be the case for some reason. I do wonder if waiting on this stuff is a mistake. I don't really have to wait on this stuff to become more crumbly. That can certainly happen alongside the worms exiting the material at the same time. So I have thought about initiating the movement of the worms out of this material by increasing the appeal of this bedding area that I created on the edge. It also makes me wonder if the worms may have started moving into that. Perhaps because of their craving for some bedding, some carbon-based food possibly, maybe the fact that it was nice and damp when I had initially created it. It may have dried out a little bit over time. So it is a little bit dry, but we'll add moisture to here too. Let's check out how it's coming along. I do see a worm cruising around in it. Let's see what we got. Here's more of these clumps. This is more of that stuff that kind of clumped together at the bottom of the VermiBag in the harvest panel. So that was my other goals, is to try to chip these clumps apart a little bit, if possible. Every time I come in here, but they are like little cinder blocks almost, which is just the way castings get when they dry out. If you know, if you've been in the vermicomposting game for a while, you'll know. Yeah, look at that. The worms are certainly moving in over here, and here again they do seem to be favoring the space right beneath the towel. I wonder what we get if we start checking over on this side. The material definitely seems a little bit crumbly. Yeah, here too. So you could tell this is a good number of worms, you know. I mean, I don't know how many worms actually existed in the VermiBag Mini when we harvested it, but I mean, a 700-day-old European nightcrawler population that has had a fair bit of room to roam and a fair bit of food given to it over the past 720 days, you would imagine probably did expand into a fairly good-sized population. But I've really had no good way to determine how many worms it is that I've got in here. But I am starting to think that it might be time to initiate the movement of the worms out of this material by actually loading up this bedding area with some food to increase the appeal. But for now, I'm just going to increase the appeal by adding a bunch of moisture. I don't think that there's a huge danger in continuing to cover with only paper and allowing for ongoing drying of the material, the clumpy stuff out here. So I was just going to cover up more or less the way we found it, where the plastic will just be there to try to capture and retain the moisture down here in the bedding area, allowing for the ongoing drying of the clumpy casting type material out here in the rest of the bin. But it does seem like it might be a good idea at some point soon to get the worms migrating out of this material so I can start moving them into a fresh new space. I've got a nice fresh newly built bin off on the side of the wormery over there, and it's just been sitting there kind of priming, waiting for a new population of worms to be introduced to it. It's been sitting there for about a month now. So I could certainly start hauling worms out of this thing at any time. And it might be a good idea to get that started sooner rather than later. But today I just wanted to take care of what we've done right here. I might be revisiting this bin in the next few days. I might come right back down here very soon to simply load up this edge of the bin with some food. And then hopefully that'll kind of initiate the movement of the worms over into that edge of the bin. I do have a feeling that these worms are kind of just moving around and exploring the space, trying to find a nice sweet spot that they can hang out in. And they're finding various different locations, whether it's right beneath the towel on the bottom of the bin, or over within that bedding area. But it does seem like if I created one particular spot that was really geared to attract them and to keep them from moving out and staying put in there once they make their way over there, then adding some nice food to that would probably be a really good idea. You know, I'm sort of questioning why wait, you know, maybe I should just shoot upstairs and grab a tray full of yummy, delicious food morsels that we could drop right into there while we're at it. And then we can actually initiate the movement of the worms out of this material. In a way, I've just sort of been treating this as just an ongoing extension of the worms still being in their previous habitat. Because I never really labeled these bins as having a start date. They're just sort of an interim solution, which was meant to you know, allow for some drying, allow some time for cocoons to hatch, and at some point I just imagine both of these trays coming to an end at some point, where the result of this one over here would just be, you know, a depopulated batch of castings, and over here something similar, but material that has also had a chance enough to dry that the material does start to become more granular and flow like real castings should. But there's certainly no reason to hold off on trying to move the worms out of this stuff. So maybe I'll save a little bit of this neem cake after I've coated the top here, and we'll treat the food that we put in there. So why don't I take a short break here, run upstairs to the refrigerator, and I believe we're going to go ahead and fetch some food that we can place down in here underneath this cardboard, and then we'll officially start into the migration of the worms out of this material. So I'll be right back. So I have here a coffee filter with the coffee in it. I've got a banana peel here. It's kind of folded in half and it's got some stuff stuck in between it. There's even a paper towel in here. It's probably got some cucumber peel in it, I believe. There's a fair bit of cucumber peel laying in here. There's the butt end of a head of lettuce, as well as some lettuce here that started to go bad, and a few other odds and ends, maybe a chunk of mushroom, I believe. But as you can see, we've got a pretty wide variety of different types of delicious, tempting foods that we're going to use to build up this feeding area. And I'm even thinking maybe, even though it is a pretty good sized feeding area, maybe we can even expand its size a little bit. Do we have to? My only thought was that it would really start to mound up a bit high if we didn't. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and just give this stuff a little bit of a nudge. You can sort of see that I had a little bit of a sheet of newspaper sort of sitting in here in between the bedding area and the contents of the bin. Not so much trying to become a barrier to prevent worms from getting over, but just as a kind of a visual aid to show me where the cutoff point is. Not that it should be very difficult to see, but that's just something I like to do usually. So I've made a little bit of room over here. I guess we'll spread this out a little bit. Maybe we'll even grab a few pieces to use as cover over the top. after we load in the fresh food. There should be some cardboard, I believe, underneath this these clumpy chunks too that came out of the bottom of the VermiBag. So there's a good amount of carbon, you know, bedding type material in here. And the towel itself, I guess, would also ultimately serve as a bedding material too. It's just cotton ultimately. It is a compostable material in a worm bin, even though I've not really been using it long enough to have any first-hand experience of seeing the stuff break down, but I've seen it demonstrated in other people's YouTube videos on other YouTube channels. But I do know it takes time. So the banana peel, I'm sure, is gonna be a hit. All these little chunks of lettuce are usually also pretty popular because it's like a nice, easy to eat sort of material, especially after it's been frozen this way and starts to thaw. It becomes pretty easy to eat kind of a food item in a worm bin. So it's certainly not a lot of food, so I can imagine needing to come back in here and replenish it if it starts attracting a good turnout. So even though it was 10 days since the last check-in, I don't know, maybe we'll check in a little bit more frequently here just to be able to keep tabs on how things are progressing in here. And if we're able to observe a good amount of worms congregating over in this edge of the bin, coming in for the food and whatnot, then we can even maybe start hauling them out, start populating a new European nightcrawler population in a new fresh bin. Which is the other thing that occurred to me when I was upstairs grabbing food. You know, we do have a good amount of European nightcrawlers over here that have probably not seen fresh food in a good long time. So kind of makes me think that this feeding area could have very nice quick results once the worms start to realize that there's a nice bounty of food hanging out here on the edge of the bin, just waiting for them to come over and capitalize on it. Oh, I almost forgot the coffee. Sort of I don't know, I always seem to have this kind of blind spot or something whenever it comes to the coffee. I just don't, if I don't have it right under my nose, it almost certainly gets overlooked. But luckily I didn't forget, putting it in here along with its filter, and then we can kind of do a little bit of a backfill. There too, once again, stuff I forget to do. The neem cake, spread that in here, and then we'll also kind of revive the dusting on the top here since I tilted up a little bit. Stuff is kind of caking up. And if the worms do enjoy this stuff as much as I've heard, then they'll appreciate that as a nice little snack. All right, very nice. Now we'll put on the coverings more or less the way we found them, I think. The plastic is going to do its best to keep the moisture that's in here, not only the moisture that I squirted in with the bottle, but the moisture that's going to come off those frozen fruits and veggies as they begin to thaw. So hopefully between the food and the moisture content of that edge of the bin, it's going to start becoming a nice tempting spot for the worms to move into. As for this bin, I feel like I really want to start seeing at least some baby worms before I try to, you know, bait something out of this material. Because if they never emerge, they never start showing up, then maybe I just have to write this off as a finished batch of castings. And even if there were cocoons in here, who knows? Maybe they're just not viable cocoons or something. So I don't know. It's always sort of a little combination of using my experience and knowledge along with making assumptions and taking guesses. But that's it. That's it for today. Quick check-in on our kind of interim solution for the ENCs. And at some point soon, I hope we're going to be able to launch off a new bin with whatever worms we're able to collect over on this edge of the bin. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. It's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.